Welcome to the Geostrategic Podcast.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping right into something pretty significant, a move that many are calling a real wake-up call: Russia's recent recognition of the Taliban government in Afghanistan. You might be thinking, okay, why now? And what does this actually mean? For us, for the West, China, the wider Middle East, this isn't just some, diplomatic note. It feels like a real shift in global power with pretty serious consequences. So our mission today is to cut through the noise. We want to look at Russia's motives, see how their approach stacks up against other players, and really get a handle on the strategic bind Western nations seem to be in. We'll break down the key implications and, make sure we highlight what it all means for you.
Yeah, it's a striking moment because for years, the Western thinking was pretty clear. Isolate the Taliban, and that pressure would force them to change their ways, to reform. But the insights we've been looking at, they paint a very different picture. This strategy, however principled, well, it's arguably left Washington and its allies looking, frankly, a bit stubborn, maybe irrelevant, even dangerously out of touch on this. We need to explore why that view is gaining ground.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that because we have got some fascinating stuff here that really challenges the sort of standard thinking on international relations. We'll be digging into that difference between, say, a principled stand and the pragmatic realities on the ground, and why that distinction matters so much right now in Afghanistan. So Russia recognizes the Taliban formally. On the surface, it sounds like a big endorsement, right? A major shift. But what's the real story? Is Putin suddenly buddies with the Taliban?
Well, not at all. Not even close. Our analysis points to this being classic hard-nosed realpolitik. That's the term being used. The Kremlin's #1 concern isn't shared values, it's stability, preventing chaos spilling over its southern border. They're especially worried about groups like ISIS-K, the Islamic State Khorasan group, really nasty characters looking for safe havens. Moscow's priority is its own backyard. Simple as that. And beyond just security, this move gives Moscow significant leverage, diplomatic leverage, economic, symbolic too. It's a pretty clear way for Russia to project global influence and, actively undermine Western presence in Central Asia. The message seems pretty blunt. We're the ones shaping things in Afghanistan now, not you. It's a direct challenge, really.
Right, and that's where it gets really interesting. Because from what we're seeing, Moscow feels pretty confident that the West has sort of boxed itself into a corner. With NATO gone, sanctions hitting the Afghan people hard, and obviously Western attention completely focused on Ukraine, Afghanistan looks like low-hanging fruit for Russia to boost its regional influence. Recognition itself doesn't cost much, diplomatically speaking. But the potential payoff, access, credibility, disrupting the West, it seems considerable for them. And Russia isn't doing this in isolation, right?
Yeah.
That's key. We're seeing other regional players taking a similar, more pragmatic line with the Taliban, even if they really don't like the regime or its actions.
Which begs the question, doesn't it? Why are these countries engaging, despite, very real disagreements and the Taliban's awful track record? If you connect the dots, the common thread seems to be this recognition of a simple, brutal reality.
Yeah.
And the Taliban control Afghanistan. For these neighbors, just ignoring that, it isn't really a practical option.
Exactly. Take China. Our deep dive shows Beijing's been busy cutting deals with the Taliban. Why? Access to Afghanistan's minerals, especially that critical lithium. So for China, it's twofold. Economic gain, obviously, grabbing vital resources, but also strategic, preventing instability spilling over into Xinjiang. That's a huge concern for them.
Then there's Iran. They've also pursued their own, let's say, pragmatic relationship. And this is despite, bitter fights over water rights, even border clashes happening sometimes with the Taliban, their engagement, driven by immediate security worries and regional influence, not any love for the regime. And even India. Historically, they backed the former Afghan government, but now they've quietly resumed diplomatic channels too. They seem to recognize that complete disengagement is just, untenable. You can't just ignore what's happening next door.
So what's really striking here is this common theme among these regional powers. It's a difficult pragmatism, right? Often reluctant, I imagine. And that really contrasts with the current Western approach.
Absolutely. None of them are under any illusions about the Taliban's nature. They don't like the regime. They don't endorse the policies. But they are dealing with the reality on the ground, prioritizing their own national interests, their own stability. And maybe that sets a precedent for other tricky geopolitical spots, too.
Okay, so that's the regional picture. Now, in stark contrast, our analysis suggests Western policy has kind of hardened into this posture of moral absolutism. For 3 years now, the underlying belief has been withhold recognition, keep the pressure on, and that will somehow force the Taliban to change, to respect rights, be inclusive.
But has it actually worked? The review we've done suggests, well, not even close is the phrase used. The Taliban are still firmly in charge, just as repressive.
Whoa.
And Afghanistan, it's sinking deeper into a massive humanitarian crisis. The argument is that the sanctions, yeah, they were aimed at the leadership, but they've actually devastated Afghanistan's economy. They're crushing ordinary Afghans far more than the Taliban leaders.
Yeah.
This is the people paying the price.
And this refusal to engage, it means the West has essentially forfeited all its leverage, doesn't it? Things like humanitarian aid, diplomatic talks. Those could have been bargaining chips. But isolation hasn't freed women. It hasn't stopped the repression. What it has done is leave Afghanistan more impoverished, more dependent on authoritarian patrons like Russia and China, and frankly, more hostile to Western interests. It's created this vacuum.
And the human cost is just staggering. Half the population needs aid just to survive. Malnutrition is rampant. Girls are still banned from high school, from university. Yet the West has almost no meaningful contact with the actual rulers making these policies. So you get this cycle of condemnation without engagement. It sounds righteous, maybe, in principle, but in practice, it seems pretty impotent. Looks good on paper, but achieves little on the ground.
Which brings us to what some are calling the uncomfortable truth. Refusing to talk doesn't make the Taliban just vanish. They aren't going anywhere. They control Kabul, the borders, they have the guns. That's the reality.
Right. And what's really fascinating, or maybe worrying, is the argument that while the West kind of looks away, Russia, China, Iran, they're actively writing the rules of engagement. If things keep going this way, the risk is Afghanistan gets fully absorbed into an authoritarian bloc. Think about it. Economically tied to Beijing, militarily sort of hedged by Moscow, politically influenced by Tehran, this isn't just seen as a moral failure, but potentially a huge strategic disaster for Western interests and, global stability generally.
That makes sense strategically. But look, for a lot of people, there's a powerful moral argument against engagement, even conditional engagement. Doesn't recognition, even talking, mean you're legitimizing their awful abuses? How do you square that circle?
Exactly. That's the crux of it. And the counter-argument here is that recognition doesn't have to mean endorsement or legitimization. Instead, it means acknowledging reality and then using that acknowledgement as a tool, as leverage. The Taliban do want things. They want legitimacy on the world stage. They want investment, aid, access to global markets. This desire, which the West currently holds back, gives the West leverage, but, and it's a big but only if it's willing to actually engage directly with the people in charge. It's about opening a channel, not signing off on their behavior.
Okay, so it's not about giving them a free pass or pretending they'll suddenly become Democrats. What kind of engagement are we talking about then? What would the conditions look like?
The proposal isn't naive. It's for engagement that's explicitly transactional, conditional, and brutally clear. Basically, offering access to aid, maybe investment, in exchange for tangible progress on the big issues: human rights, girls' education, real counterterrorism cooperation. It's about setting clear benchmarks and demanding specific, measurable results. No fuzziness.
Has this kind of approach, dealing with, let's face it, unsavory regimes for strategic reasons, been done before? Or is this seen as too, radical for today's diplomacy?
Well, our deep dive actually reminds us, during the Cold War, Western powers routinely engaged with unsavory regimes. Think Pinochet's Chile, Mao's China. They did it when strategic interests demanded it. So the idea that any engagement automatically equals endorsement, it's often called a convenient fiction. In the real world, diplomacy often involves talking to regimes you find deeply problematic. The goal isn't to validate them, but to create pressure points, try to influence behavior, and secure your own interests.
So the alternative, sticking to what some call absolutist moral purity, while Russia and China basically cement their influence, that's being described as not only naive, it is strategically suicidal. And this inaction, it has real consequences that ripple outwards, affecting everyone, not just people inside Afghanistan.
Absolutely. Every year the West stays disengaged. It just deepens Afghanistan's reliance on these authoritarian powers. Every month the sanctions bite. It drives ordinary Afghans deeper into poverty, desperation, and resentment. Towards the West, potentially. The vacuum is being filled. And it's not by actors who share Western values or interests. This isn't just about Afghanistan anymore. It impacts the whole geopolitical chessboard, the future influence of democratic countries.
And there are direct security risks too, right? For everyone, even countries far away. Afghanistan could still become a haven for transnational jihadist groups, and right now, counterterrorism cooperation with the West is virtually non-existent under this policy of isolation. The sources we looked at warn that ignoring this reality risks repeating the mistakes that let Afghanistan become a launchpad for terror 2 decades ago. The memory of 9/11 looms large here.
So the choice facing the West seems incredibly stark. Option 1, continue with a policy that looks principled but achieves nothing concrete. Option 2, pivot to pragmatic engagement that at least offers a chance to shape outcomes. It really feels like a moment of reckoning, weighing that moral stand against practical impact and, strategic necessity.
So for you listening, these aren't just, abstract debates for diplomats, are they? These decisions have direct effects on global stability, on human rights, everywhere, really, and on these ongoing shifts in global power that are going to shape the world we all live in for years to come. Understanding this helps make sense of, well, a very complex world. Russia's recognition of the Taliban, it's definitely a wake-up call. A pretty stark reminder that in international politics, pragmatism often wins out over posturing, especially when core national interests are seen to be on the line.
Yeah, the key takeaway seems to be the West doesn't have to like the Taliban. Nobody's suggesting that, but it probably does have to deal with them in some way. Pretending they don't exist hasn't just failed. It seems to have actively handed influence to America's adversaries and created a strategic void.
So the big question now for the West, and maybe for all of us watching these global moves, is will they stick to what seems like a failing approach, or will they adapt before it's, well, too late? It's that classic choice between the ideal and the achievable, isn't it?
And as our deep dive suggests, maybe it is time, finally, to talk. Not to legitimize, definitely not to endorse, but to engage with the reality on the ground, however uncomfortable that reality is. And maybe, just maybe, in doing so, to actually lead again.
What stands out most to you from all this? How do you think the West should navigate this incredibly tricky situation? Balancing those core principles with practical action and strategic needs. Lots to think about there. We'd love for you to keep exploring these crucial questions. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this discussion valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to the Geostrategic Podcast for more in-depth analysis on topics that shape our world. Stay informed, stay ahead, and stay tuned for the next episode.